Robert Scott Bell.
Welcome back to the show that asks no permission of no government, no state agency. Permission here is not required. We heal because it is our birthright. And we cover issues in the realm of healing, not just physiological, emotional, mental, but we cover it economically and politically. A little later this hour, Judy Irwin returns. We're going to talk right frequency, all the things the government doesn't want you to know about, and the FDA and Big Pharma. But it's here on the Robert Scott Bell Show. And right now, what else is here? We're following up on last hour's discussion with Tom Mullen. Rand Paul endorses Mitt Romney, and man, oh man, the stones are coming out. They're being thrown at everybody in the campaign, involved in the campaign. I've got someone right here also probably having to wear a flak jacket right now. Jack Hunter, the Southern Avenger, returns to the Robert Scott Bell Show.
How you doing, Robert?
Jack, it's great to have you back on board. I'm telling you, people, there's emotional responses and reactions. Even as I heard this, I was like, dude, what is Rand Paul doing? And why is he doing it on the Hannity show of all places?
Yeah, maybe that wasn't the best place to do it. I actually agree with some of the supporters on that. It could have been maybe handled differently. But, and I just made an almost 10-minute video about this. This is a transcript you can find online. This is something that I assumed that Senator Paul needed to do since 2010 when he was elected. People are surprised to hear me say that. I thought that whoever the Republican nominee was in 2012, Senator Paul had to endorse. Hopefully it was going to be his father, obviously an easy endorsement, and he endorsed his father early on throughout this campaign. But now that his father's saying that he won't be the nominee, and it's obvious that Romney will, he went ahead and endorsed. Now you ask, why is it necessary for Rand Paul to endorse? Well, a lot of us in the Liberty Movement have high hopes for Senator Paul going forward. Maybe 2016 he might run for president, depending on what happens in this election and whatnot. When we get to that point, and if Rand Paul is every bit the candidate as far as his popularity and the coalitions he's able to build in the Republican Party that many of us think he can be, and that many of the neoconservatives fear he will be, and believe me, they do. There's a reason he hasn't been on the cover of the Weekly Standard, unlike Marco Rubio and Bachmann and all the other people this election. You cannot give the other candidates, whether it's a Marco Rubio, a Chris Christie, a Jeb Bush, a Bobby Jindal, running in that election, the ammunition to say, well, when it came down to brass tacks and we were trying to kick Obama out, you couldn't even be on our side then, Senator Paul. You're not even a real Republican. Now, you or I, Robert, or Paul supporters out there might think that sounds silly. I think we should also have the foresight to know that that's how 99% of the voting population thinks in pure partisan terms.
Yes,
and
that's right.
Jack,
if I may, Jack, if I may, like I said, I saw your video earlier today as well, and I want people to watch it. I've got it linked up at the blog at robertscottbell.com. But you're, like I said, you're being hammered by people that think now you're a turncoat. And they're talking Jesse Benton, a turncoat. Doug Weed, I've interviewed all of these people, including yourself, and I know you personally. And so I can't imagine that would be the case. But how are you handling this idea that there was some form of sabotage going on?
Well, it's my job to handle it. And look, people have been upset for at least the last month or two about, a lot of us were trying to get Ron Paul elected president. That was the whole point of the campaign. Now, there's other factors involved in the campaign, which I've talked about at length, but we all wanted that to happen. And to the degree that things weren't going that way, or our people were being bullied in the delegate process, which was a big problem, all these sorts of issues, people were upset and they were looking for places to focus their anger, whether on Jesse or me, or I don't know, Doug Weed, I don't know. But long story short, it's a messy process, and it's continuing to be a messy process with the Rand Paul endorsement. The movement that Ron Paul started was based on being pure, and it's about principle. Now, how are we going to advance those principles? I would say that Congressman Paul has done something revolutionary on his own in advancing the principles of individual liberty, a more prudent foreign policy, non-interventionist foreign policy, protecting civil liberties with this movement he's built. Think about this. About 2 million people this year have voted for Ron Paul in the primaries. That's double what we did in 2008. Okay, how do we take this wonderful thing we have, this movement, this principle to the core, and turn that into actual policy? How do we transform the Republican Party into the party of Bush and war and torture and all that awful stuff and big spending, and to the party of Ron Paul and Rand Paul and Justin Amash and Thomas Massey and hopefully Senator Kurt Bills and all these other candidates? Do we say, well, we're going to stand in the corner. We're not going to cooperate with the Republican Party on any level whatsoever and be principled and be happy about that? Or are we going to engage and fight the neoconservatives and the establishment on their own turf by not giving them any unnecessary ammunition, which a non-endorsement by Senator Paul would be, and take that fight to them and actually implement this into policy? Now, it's hard to take many of the people who were inspired by Ron Paul, where it's 100% pure, no compromise politically, whatever, and make them understand that. But, you know, I just turned 38 years old last week. I was a Buchanan guy when I was 19, and, you know, I've sort of seen 12 guys in a room sort of point at each other and argue over who's more principled, and the rest of the world doesn't even know they exist. Well, we've got about 2 million people in this movement if you judge by the primary numbers, and I think we can turn that into 4 million, 10 million, 20 million. It doesn't take a majority to create a revolution, but it does take some foresight and some strategy, and that's all we're talking about here.
Well, and my point last hour was that if Ron Paul, of course, we know he's not going to compromise. He never has. He never will. But Rand, we've looked at and said, wow, he said some things that calls into question. And then Tom Mullen and I discussed some of it and said, well, he really didn't say something different. He said something differently, whether it be on the foreign policy issue or otherwise. But the fact is, we got a microscope. We got a magnifying glass. I was most excited when he was on the Senate floor a couple of weeks ago talking about disarming the FDA and allowing the American people to know what they could use for healing outside of FDA-approved drugs. I said, there's a guy who's not compromising.
That's exactly right. A guy who's blocked sanctions on Iran twice by trying to add amendments to the bills saying that this is not a declaration of war, and people like Harry Reid have just shot it down. Somebody who voted to defund the Iraq war, Senator Jim DeMint from my state actually joined him on that, talking about influencing the Republican Party, voted against the Patriot Act, led the fight on the NDAA. You got his voting record, and it's actually going to be a video here soon, Robert. You're looking at a man who is very much his father's son. Rand Paul said something in 2010 that people should remember. He wanted to be judged by how he voted, not how he campaigned. A Romney endorsement is the same as campaigning. It's the same sort of thing. Let me ask you this, Robert. Do you think Ron Paul sold out when he voted for John Boehner as House Speaker?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that was a big issue, too, for a while. I remember that.
But he's always voted for whoever, he's always voted with the rest of the Republicans, Dennis Hastert before that, all kind of stuff. Now, why would Ron Paul do that? The choices were Nancy Pelosi and John Boehner. Now, John Boehner's terrible. I wouldn't vote for John Boehner for nothing. But I'm a conservative pundit. I'm not a congressman or senator. Why would Ron Paul have done that? Do people think that he believes in John Boehner's political agenda and the Patriot Act and war? Does anybody think Ron Paul believes that and endorses that because he supported John Boehner and voted for him for House Speaker? No, because there's a difference between political strategy and how you vote. This is no different. Somebody's going to be president out of Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. What Rand Paul is doing is voting with the rest of Republicans, just like Ron Paul voted with the rest of the Republicans in the House for John Boehner. It does not mean they support John Boehner's agenda or Mitt Romney's agenda. Ron did that as a political strategy, a procedural rule. Ron likes to fight the issues on their own merits. Okay, I'll support John Boehner, and John Boehner brought up, I don't know, the Patriot Act or CISPA. I'm going to fight those on their own merits. That's exactly what Senator Paul's going to do. Do you think a President Romney, who's going to be as awful as you or I think he would be, let's say he won, brought up all this old Bush, horrible Republican stuff, who's going to be fighting against that? It's going to be Rand Paul.
Yeah, that's a very important distinction to make. And, of course, we know the people that support Ron Paul are likely not going to vote for Romney whether Rand endorses him or not. But if Rand has any future politically, I understand the explanation. I do understand it. I mean, but we're outside. We don't have to do that. We don't have to make those political decisions that Rand does. Now, let me ask you this about the timing again of this so-called endorsement. I know Ron had sent out a thing that didn't look possible, but still a lot of the people that worked their aspirins off to become delegates for Ron Paul might have said, hey, there might be something we can do at the convention. Couldn't he have waited just a little longer?
Well, that's the craziest thing about all this. All those people who work for those delegates are integral to this puzzle. That's the most important part. What Republican Party at the grassroots and working those state conventions and showing up in Tampa and being 20 or 30% of the people on the floor and showing your influence and flexing your muscle, who's going to be the establishment that's going to support a Senator Paul or a president candidate, Amash, or whatever happens in the future? It's going to be those people. They have done the yeoman's work, trying to get Ron Paul elected. Now that that's not going to happen, still what they're doing is just as important and just as invaluable to the movement. And to those who don't think so, I just would like to dissuade you of that opinion as strongly as I can. I can't tell you how proud Dr. Paul is of each and every one of you, and his heart's with you, and it always has been and always will be. And I think you see that in his speeches, his reactions, how his interaction with, the people in the movement. That is part of the transformation of the Republican Party I'm talking about. What breaks my heart is that so many in this movement can't see that, but I understand it. I don't blame them. The idea that Ron Paul's son would endorse Mitt Romney, us all knowing how awful Romney is, I get that. That makes sense. But at the same time, there's a reason that, ask your average regular Republican if they like Ron Paul. They say, well, I don't know about Ron Paul. What about Rand? I love Rand Paul. Ask our people, what do you think about Ron Paul? We love Ron Paul. What about Rand Paul? Oh, I don't know, and especially I don't know this week. Walking that line, perception is reality. Walking that line has been something strategy-wise that Senator Paul's been able to do that his father's never really been interested in doing. That's fine. Yep. This movement never would have been there without Ron Paul, but to take it to the next level and to drag it into the mainstream, I think Senator Paul's making all the right moves, and this is the latest in a succession of moves to do exactly that.
Jack Hunter, the Southern Avenger, thank you for stopping by and giving some explanation where people are upset. We know the emotions are high. We've got lots more healing to go, though, on the Robert Scott Bell Show. Stan.